Hello, everyone. My name is Kurt Bachman, and welcome back to The Ultimate Dish. Today, we're honored to have André Hueston Mack, a sommelier, winemaker, and designer. Despite having a successful career with Citicorp Investment Services, Mack decided to leave his desk job and pursue his passion for wine. While working as a sommelier in San Antonio, Mack discovered the joys of introducing guests to the little-known vineyards that first attracted him to the business and the instant gratification of a guest's reaction. Love that. While still in Texas, Mack was awarded the prestigious title of Best Young Sommelier in America by the highly regarded Chez Rotisserie. This recognition led to a job as a sommelier at Thomas Keller's world-renowned French Laundry in Yountville, California. He then went on to accept the position of head sommelier at Keller's equally famed Per Se in New York City, where he managed a 1,500 selection award-winning wine list and consulted regularly with Chef Keller on menu and pairing development. Winemaking had always been a dream of his, and when it came to fruition in 2007, when he founded Maison Noir Wines. Based on the success of his wine labels, in 2011, Mack established Get Fresh Crew, a boutique graphic design firm for which he serves as creative director. Mack has been featured in major publications such as Food and Wine, Wine and Spirits Magazine, New York Times, the Huffington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. He was honored in 2007 with the Network Journal's 40 Under 40 Achievement Award. Get ready for an inspiring conversation. Get thirsty about pivoting careers, what it takes to become a somm, and so much more. And there he is. I'm exhausted. Let me catch my breath. That's you, buddy. That's you.
What a walk down memory lane.
Wow.
Sometimes I don't reflect a lot, but it was it's always kind of great to listen to every now and then. Just to figure out like how far you come. You know what I mean?
Oh, I love that. Yeah, yeah. And to keep you grounded and all of that. So let's set the tone. You're in Brooklyn, you're in New York. Love the city. I believe I saw on one of your latest IG videos that you plan on doing a lot of travel this summer. I know you love Boulder. I know it has a special place in your heart. We'll talk about that in a minute, but
it does.
Fill us in on what's going on with travel this summer.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, I travel quite a bit, when I embarked on this journey to create a wine company after leaving restaurants, what I guess what I knew how to do and what I was confident in, I used to be a waiter, right? It was easy to walk up to a table of strangers and talk to them and converse with them. Same thing, people who came to the restaurant, you're outgoing and you talk, and I felt like what my strong suit was like, hey, I want to go tell my story. And I traveled everywhere around the world that anybody would listen. And I'm not a good salesperson, right? Because I never asked for the order, right? I just, you know what I mean?
You're just chatting it up.
Yeah, well, I think that's what the sales rep is there for. But like the whole idea was to tell the story and to talk to people. And so that was always fun. And so in 2020, I decided, oh, you know what? I want to be part of the restaurant landscape of New York, right? That's what I always dreamed about when I moved here 20 years ago in '04 was, I just wanted to open a little wine bar, and like anywhere, when I wasn't anywhere in the world traveling, you might be able to find me at this small little watering hole in my neighborhood that was 400 square feet. And so I opened that in January of 2020. And quickly COVID hit, and then I doubled down and opened several other restaurants in New York City on that street, and kind of got away from traveling, to talk about wine, and and so now I'm back on the road. But basically, I traveled for a decade, almost every single week to anywhere in the world. I went to the airport, and that's how I built it. Yeah.
You know what I love about your opening, Andre, is you mentioned being a server, being a waiter. You mentioned guests. You mentioned hospitality. I immediately started thinking about our mutual friend Bobby Stuckey. I thought about Will and his beautiful book Unreasonable Hospitality. Right.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about. And I'll shoot a note over to Bobby a little bit later. I just love those stories of connection and family and friendship and such. But this isn't on the script, everyone. But I'd love to know how important you said some beautiful things before we got started today. Having a mentor, having a friend, having somebody
Yeah.
that
You
that
know,
shows you the way. Yeah.
well, no, it's great. And what's interesting too, and what I like to tell a lot of young people is it wasn't one day that I went to Bobby Stuckey and asked him to be my mentor. It was just from being around him. Like, yeah, I wouldn't even, and on that list, it's so funny because now I have to think about it and say, well, he kind of is a mentor from afar, not like, he was always open to ask questions. I got to the French Laundry. I had a mentor who ended up, he came when Bobby moved on to start Frasca. Paul Roberts came in, and I was part of Paul Roberts' crew, and both great people. Um, but the thing about like Bobby is, um, he's kind of stayed true to what it was. It's there's lots of sommeliers, in our generation who became entrepreneurial and move on to do other things. And, obviously he's entrepreneurial by having his own restaurant and they have their own wine, Scarpetta. But he still works the floor. And, there's some dignity and honor in that. And when you see that, uh, it's pretty amazing. And, I give a lot of credit to Bobby. When I started Maison Noir Wines, he gave me my first official wine dinner, and it was at Frasco on a Monday night. And I was really grateful of that. And that really set the tone on the next 10 or 20 years on how I conducted these dinners, how I conducted myself. And I don't know, it just, and I try to tell, like I said, tell young people, a mentor you can have from afar, right? You don't have to, I think a lot of people think that a mentor is like, hey, I'm gonna sit you down and today I'm gonna tell you everything I know. It doesn't really work that way. And
No,
but yeah,
no.
but they broke the mold with Bobby, and I'm proud to call him a friend, and I do cherish a lot. I cherish the moments that I'm around him, and that part is great and really fun. And I think that's a product of at working at a place like the French Laundry. You learned a lot of life lessons there. Where we were all young in that sense. We were trying to figure out how to be adults, how to be men, in that sense. And what I take a lot away from my experience of working there wasn't, just food and wine, right? It was, how to carry yourself, what integrity meant, and just a lot of those things, and a lot of those lessons were meant and practiced within the four walls of the restaurant. But a lot of us, I think, we found ourselves bringing them into our everyday lives and living off of those principles and at least as to guide us. And that's what really made it a really great experience to work there.
I love that. And I love the word dignity, right?
Yeah.
I love this story, and this is an ode to Bobby as well.
Mhm.
I was at an event in New York years ago, um, and it was beautiful because Anthony Bourdain was there,
Okay.
beautiful man, and Daniel Ballou and Eric Ripert, right?
Oh
They
yeah.
they were up on stage, and someone asked such a innocent question. The question was, chefs, who cooks in your restaurant when you're not there? And Eric Ripert took that one, and he was chuckling, and it was great because
I'm
he was
sure.
like, well, I guess the same people cook in the restaurant when I'm not there that do when I am there.
When I am there. Yeah,
And
totally,
it
totally.
was just a great response, right? And what I love about Bobby is he's got a lot going on. Tavernetta, in Vail now, in Denver, and two
Absolutely.
locations in Denver, and Frasca, and Pizzeria Alberico. But more times than not, Andre, you're right. He's working the floor.
No, he's there. He
He's
he
there
is
at
there.
pre-meal, and he's there as the last plate gets taken off the table, and that's hospitality.
Yeah, and that's real. And I think it pays off in spades, to his employees and the people who work around him.
I have to say, this just if anyone hasn't seen, and this is you met Noelle a little bit earlier there. She's a major fan of Bon Appetit World of Wine
Mhm.
series on
Thank
YouTube.
you.
But can I just say, I was pumping myself up earlier today, running the school, and I'm like, I'm going to put Andre on for a little while. And,
Okay.
I was just listening. I listened right before the show. I listened to the Piedmont episode, right? And
Okay.
I just got to tell you, and I think this, right? So Italian wine can be complicated. Any wine can be complicated, but
Oh yeah.
the way you talked about plum pie, and this is an everyday wine, and this is easy drinking, and how you talked about other wines and where the acidity comes from, and you related it to apple pie, and I mean that I that's how people learn today. You're kind of flipping the classroom. I love that concept, right? You're helping people imagine what they're drinking,
You know,
right?
totally.
And
Yeah.
so I'm just curious. Again, I'm off script. I'm just ad-libbing today. Where does that come from? Were you a teacher at the French Laundry as well, or did that come with time?
Well, I mean, I don't think that I felt like a teacher there, right? In that idea of, um, it was, it was that thing of like, oh, talk about what you know. And I think sometimes you get there, you get overwhelmed, and then you start to think, well, do I know that? I don't know that. I do think that I had to figure out a style uh, of how to talk about wine, even in a place like that, a style that made it relatable to everybody else. And
Yeah, yeah,
I think that was hard because that was let's call that 20 years ago, right? So the idea of talking about a wine in a way that people could understand or meeting them where they're at was a big thing for me because that's how I learned. So to talk about a
yeah,
wine and say, to use descriptors that people hadn't heard of, I was like, yeah, this is a banger right here. And like and
yeah,
the fact
yeah,
is they knew what that meant in the sense of music, right? But it
yeah,
had never been applied to wine. And it was really funny because, moving to New York in '04, you have a lot of New York employees, that work there, and a lot of them are, it's the epicenter of a lot of things. But a lot of them were taken aback by the language in which I used. And and often how I talked about it was, listen, the way that I scribe wine here and to you guys is a way for you to to bring it in, to accept it, to like understand it. We don't want to use that language with the guests, right? You have to figure out your own word, but I want to explain to you. And the idea for me was to get you excited about the wine, right?
yeah.
To get the staff excited about the wine, learn something about the wine, and using that kind of language. I remember, I used something like banger, and I remember, a chef asked another chef. He goes, "Is he allowed to use that word?" You know what I mean? So it was a lot of those things where, um, it made wine fun in that way and to be able
Yeah,
to
yeah,
describe them. And so I wouldn't say, I would say that I was a teacher there because, as sommeliers, it's our job to teach every day. Um, Not to talk down to, but like even when you're and when we say teach, I think that comes off like this. When we like to say it, use the word educate, right? It's our job to educate daily, but not in a forceful way, and just kind of reinforcing things. And so that's was amazing to me because that's what I learned to do was to educate the table, educate our staff, and then who knows, the pre-shift meeting. I was telling somebody that the other day it's pretty powerful. I decided that I wanted to be better at the pre-shift meeting because I was nervous. I was doing the wine portion of it. And I think outside of death, public speaking is number two. Right. And to boot, like this is all a staff that works at the best restaurant in the world. And I'm just showing up there. And it's kind of this thing of really trying to figure out my style. And it was fun. It was fun to do. And by making myself do the pre-shift meeting and being dedicated to it, it was a way to attack my fear and that felt like that was a life skill. I didn't know what I was going to be able to do with it, but I think it paid off in the end in the sense of being a little bit more comfortable talking about not just wine but other things in front of a
I
lot of people or
love.
no people. Yeah.
You don't hear pre-shift much anymore, right? Not every
Mhm.
restaurant does it.
Correct.
But the ideas are just flowing. What we do at the school here, we simply call it a lineup, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
it's less about trying to find out what students are doing wrong and more about, how prepared they are for the day, right?
Correct.
Uniform looks good, apron looks good, have
Hmm.
you done your prep work and such. But I love the idea of the pre-shift is, boy, if you don't get that right, and then you go on stage in 10 minutes,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a problem, right?
No, what it is, and I think what too is just just nervous energy, like what you know,
Yeah.
kind of that you think you do, and then presenting it in a way, but also building confidence with the staff. Like you have to be confident in the words and the way that you speak to them about wine so that they can actually carry that over into the table. Not because you
Oh
can't
yeah.
come, even though we had, maybe three or four sommeliers per shift. Not all sommeliers made it to the table, and we really wanted to enable our captains and our staff to be able to at least talk about wine. Have that initial conversation and carry and carry their own. And if they got a little too, out of hand or a little too deep, they could always call on us and we could come over to the table. But I love going to the table and doing table side, but it was our job to prepare the staff to know about wine.
I gotta tell you, super quick story about the
Yeah,
French
yeah.
Laundry. So I was there with my wife, and that menu actually still hangs in our family room at home. It's
Oh yeah.
spectacular, and people still come into the house and they're like, "What is was that the price? Was that like per person?" But we're food people, but so we were in Napa for a while, and years and years and years ago, I met some people from Hess Vineyards, and then I met some people from Frogs Leap, and
Yeah.
here I am at the French Laundry, and can I just tell you, I don't remember who the sommelier was or the wine steward was at that night, but he couldn't have been more patient and more loving with me, right? So my
Yeah.
wife was mortified because, oh, we're so excited to be here. Dak Shepard and his wife are on the next table, right? Um,
Yeah, who's who? It's
I
amazing.
mean, it's like we're at the French Laundry, and I ask for frog's leap. I'm like, you got any frog's leap on the menu? And he was so polite. He was like, oh, Chef Keller has wine, grown for him, and
Oh yeah.
so on and so forth. And not only did I do that once, I did it twice. I did.
Okay.
It's like, are you sure you don't have any frog's leap back there? Oh my gosh. Well, hey, Andre, we'll get to your incredible design work and wine label just a bit, but for our students, for our listeners, we have to rewind a little bit. I want to
Okay.
start with what I think might be one of the most inspiring stories for a young, not just culinary student, just a young person, right?
Yeah,
Tuning in. You left a successful career behind to follow your dream, your gut, to get into wine.
absolutely.
You're working at Citicorp. Um, you probably maybe you're talking about tannins and terroir there, but probably
Probably
more.
not.
Probably not, right?
Yeah.
So, what made you take that leap into the wine world? And is there that one single moment where this is it? I This is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, yeah, all the above. I think it's funny because I don't know if I had a successful career in finance because I wasn't there that long. But, I was successful enough to get a license, right? A Series
Yeah,
7
yeah,
and a Series 63. But it was that attempt of like moving on to something else. When you told people that you waited tables, it wasn't a career. It was just a job. Like everybody
yeah.
was going on to bigger and better things. And me too, and I thought, oh, okay, I'll go to finance. And when I went there, you just spent a lot of time on a desk, behind a desk, on a phone. You talk to people, but it wasn't the same. Like when you worked in a restaurant and hospitality, the structure, like you show up to this place, you know how it's supposed to go, but there's all the different types of people, stuff happens, you know, and that made it exciting in a way and being on your feet. Um, and so I didn't really enjoy hanging out at, working in finance and, the kind of stars aligned in a way where, they merged with Travelers Group and they were offering severance. And I had never heard of that before. Or I could reapply to work at Solomon Smith Barney. And I took that opportunity, um, to say, I want to probably walk away from this. And it was funny because I asked the woman several times, it was like, so explain to me what severance is again. Because, I wasn't real sure. It's like, because I got to go home and tell my mama at some point. Like, I got to go back and tell my mama, not that I live there, but it was like, tell my mama, like, I didn't get fired. I didn't quit. Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they
Because this
gave me
was
this
the,
money. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
this was the big payoff, right? It was like, now you worked so hard and now you were going to have this career. And, so having severance, allowed me to take a little bit of time and not rush to do anything. I wasn't real sure what I was going to do, but I spent a lot of time what watching. I don't know why it came on, but I was watching old episodes of Frasier, and so during the weekday, around 3 or 4, they used to play old episodes back to back to back. So they maybe played 3 or 4 episodes of the show. And I thought it was corny. I wasn't really into it, but I think I couldn't find the remote or something like that. So I never changed the channel. And then slowly I got into it. But what I was attracted to, they were kind of these two pompous brothers who were characters of themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was the camaraderie that they had around alcohol, specifically wine, that I noticed. And that's what piqued my interest. The first time I ever heard of Gewürztraminer was on that show.
Isn't that something? Wow.
Sancerre. Uh, that the reason why I knew 61 Bordeaux was a great vintage was from that show. And, that show gave me the courage to walk into a wine shop for the first time in my life. Right. And I've always, I've said this many times where, the greatest foil to pretension is humor. And I felt somehow this show armed me with some comedic antidotes. And also, you have that defense mechanism where if you make fun of yourself first, that you know what I mean, then nobody else picks on you. But that show was kind of the gateway that gave me the courage to go into a wine shop. And that's where I realized that wine people are very generous. They love to share not only wine, but their knowledge. And and then all of a sudden they love to talk. And so you're in the shop and everybody's talking about wine. Uh, and I learned early on that they were accommodating. I'd walk in the store. I was like, "Hey, I got $12 today. What do you got for me? What are you excited about?" Right? You know what I mean? And so it was just this gradual thing that happened where I didn't think that what I do now currently in life. I didn't think that when I was watching Frasier or I walked into a wine store. It was just that I wanted to have wine in my life. And then what eventually happens, you have to go back to work. I went to go back work at a restaurant, and it was that at that moment that I caught what we call in the industry the wine bug. And
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that go ahead.
And that's what I was going to ask next. So, what was that first wine job like? But since you brought up Fraser Kane, and oftentimes he looked like us, right? Didn't he have a talk show? Wasn't he
Yeah, yeah, he was a radio
a
host.
radio host,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it was
Yeah,
a radio show. So he had a show online, and he was I think a psychiatrist.
psychiatrist, and he gave advice and
Yeah, yeah,
stuff. Yeah,
totally,
but
yeah.
it's funny. I don't know that I binge watched it, but I watched it. Everybody did, right? It was
Hmm.
probably one of the most popular shows. But
Hmm.
now that you say that, you're right. There was a lot of chatter about wine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they were blind tasting on that. They had a wine club that they were involved in, the Cork Master. I mean, there was so many elements of it.
Wow.
They drank sherry,
Yeah,
so it was
yeah.
these things where it was just kind of like, oh, what are these things? Like, I want to explore those things. And that show gave me the opportunity to explore those things. And then, the next level was like, oh, how do I worked as a waiter in restaurants, so I felt comfortable doing that. It was the wine part that was new for me. And that was it. And I think every waking moment, I spent, thinking about wine or tasting wine. I'd get off of work at like maybe 10:30 or 11, and from like 11 to 4 in the morning, I would study. And that's kind of been my thing, kind of I wouldn't call it a secret weapon, but I've never been a person that needed a lot of sleep. And also it was really, maybe 4 or 5 hours. And then of course it's those days where you're kind of like, hey, I need 12 or you lay down. But like, I think for
Yeah.
me, it was really about, I was something that I was excited about that I didn't want to go to sleep. Right. So I'd stay up. And then finally when went to sleep, I couldn't wait to get up because I don't know, it was just an exciting time and just learning about this whole new world was pretty amazing for me.
That is amazing, and that's what life should really be about. I'm totally dumping that into Chat GPT after we're done chatting today, because I wonder if that's even a thing, if that was by design. I
What,
gotta know now.
what was?
Incorporating the wine and all of that into the series.
And
I
yeah,
just
no, totally. So I think one of the producers was an English guy. He was a onophile, so he was the person that was writing all the wine stuff in it.
oh
From
okay.
what I gather,
Yeah, that's fascinating. So
yeah,
what
it
was
was
your
really great.
first job like in when you were really like I'm in the wine business?
Yeah, when I really got into wine, I was a waiter at a place called the Palm Steakhouse. It opened in San Antonio on the Riverwalk, and it was that experience there where it was the first place that we trained for a whole week or something like that. But what was interesting about it, over 2 nights, at the end, the last hour, the last 2 hours of training for 2 nights, we tasted about, I don't know, maybe 60% of the wines on the wine list. The wine list was only about 60 or 50 selections, but I had never done that before.
Yeah.
And, that was the magical moment for me because, it was the first time that I had three glasses of wine in front of me. We had
Yeah.
Riesling, Sauvignon Blanc, and Chardonnay. And the idea that you could pick them up and smell them and vacillate between the both of them, I felt really helped me distinguish the differences between the two. And then I have
Yeah.
to say
Yeah.
it was Sauvignon Blanc that really opened my eyes, where it was like, wow, like this smells
It,
so different. And not that it was like a famous one or anything like that. It was just contrast to the other wines. It was just something that spoke to me. And I think that was probably one of the moments or the beginning of planting the seed to say, oh wow, I kind of want to do this for a living. And then also simultaneously learning that like, oh, there's a job that you can do this. Cause I was just a waiter there. I was like, oh, it's called a sommelier. Like, what is that? And so that was the beginning of it. And I have to say that, maybe, 3 months later, yeah, I would say 18 months later, I was working at the French Laundry. But
oh my goodness.
but after that training session, I want to say 6 weeks later, I probably knew more about wine than anyone in the restaurant. It was at that moment where my peers and other waiters really trusted me and
Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
"Hey,
Yeah.
can you go talk to my table about wine? I'll watch your table." So I was doing kind of the wine chat,
Wow.
but I was a waiter. There was no wine person in that particular restaurant. And then from there, I got my first sommelier job at a steakhouse that was right next door, and
Aren't you the
that was
best
sort of a.
teach? Aren't you the best teacher in the world when you're learning yourself? So
Mhm.
you were learning, you're staying up till 4 in the morning, you were getting
Absolutely.
educated, right? And you couldn't wait to tell people.
Oh,
I
it
I
was the
I have to ask
best.
Sauvignon Blanc. I could think of, some memories. So like in Ratatouille,
Okay.
when
Okay.
it took him back, do you find that if you had a Sauvignon Blanc tomorrow in a beautiful restaurant with some friends and family, would it take you back to that day?
It can.
Yeah.
It has happened. I'm not a really reflective person, but it has happened at times where you go right back to that spot, and I,
Yeah.
I just think about being young and somewhat naive and like, gung ho rushing into things. And I don't know, it's,
Fearless, right?
yeah. And,
Yeah.
and, and the curiosity and somehow, it's like, wow. And you reflect on that part and then you come to present day. And that's the really hard thing to accept is like how far you have come
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the things that
Yeah.
you have forgotten, right? So to speak.
You mentioned, and I love this, instant gratification, introducing guests to lesser known vineyards, but introducing guests to anything, right?
Correct.
Anything that's
Absolutely.
new. Can you talk about that energy and
Yeah,
how did
absolutely.
that hook you? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's all of it. Like that was the rush, right? And when you
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
what I missed about the restaurant when I went to go work in finance wasn't the wine because I didn't really work in any restaurants that had wine, right? It was the idea of talking to someone, you know, making recommendations, those things, leading someone down the path, and then bringing them something, and they're like, and you see it, their eyes light up. You see them like, wow, this is so great, thank you. Like that was the instant gratification of turning somebody on to something, right? That felt good to me, and it seemed like it felt good to the guest. And I don't think I really got that working in finance in that way. And it was personal in a way, but very quick because, you probably spent maybe 30 minutes with these people. You might have
Yeah.
been sitting at the table for an hour, but the actual interactions in it. And that was something that drew me in. That was something that was adrenaline filled, where it was like, wow, like you got this rush. And also, I have to say that actually fueled the quest for knowledge,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like that thing, like I need to know more. I need to know more. This is amazing. And not just like for the little stories, but just being comfortable enough to command not only the language, but the table.
Yeah.
Like when you
Yeah.
spoke,
The
people,
room.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
people perked up and, and you could answer those questions. It was fun. It still is.
Wine is interesting, right? It's intimidating. It's celebratory. I can remember years and years and years ago when I was running a dining room in Portland, Oregon, in a beautiful hotel, and
Um,
we had a group of we had a law firm in basically, and
mhm,
they were they were ordering some beautiful wines, and one of the partners got up and started, pontificating of, everything he knew about this particular wine and the history of this wine and how you might be getting some hints of eucalyptus because and so after the event, I thanked him and I said, your story and your knowledge about the wine. He goes, "Oh, I made all that up. These guys don't know what they're drinking." And I was like, okay, you lied to me, but why do people have to do that, right? I feel so, farmers, people that grow these beautiful wines, you don't have to make stories up like that, right? Just tell the truth.
No,
Yeah,
totally. But also, I felt like in that situation, sometimes it feels like it's a defense mechanism in the way of like,
of what they don't know. Yeah,
well, yeah,
yeah.
or that they thought they knew, right?
Oh,
Maybe he had a personal relationship, and you know what I mean? Like, I feel
yeah,
people say
yeah,
that all the time, where they say what they know, and then they realize that I might know more than them, and they say, "Well, I don't really know what I was talking about. I was kind of making that up." But people do, in a way, make stuff up because I don't know. That's just kind of how it's been set up in a way where people are afraid to ask. But also, it's
yeah,
a
yeah,
weird system in a way where there's no tasting notes for a cocktail.
yeah,
Right,
yeah,
right. So now you have
yeah.
tasting notes for a wine, and it talks about things that aren't actually physically in the wine. So it feels confusing in a way, and it's set up by design to be, you know, not inclusive in a way, right? Like you have to know, and some of that matters and some of it doesn't. It's just a weird thing. It's like what it's like people are willing to accept being an expert in their taste and a lot of other things in life, but in wine, not so much. And it's like,
Yeah,
why do you
yeah,
give your
yeah,
power away? You know what you like. You like a cheeseburger, or you don't, or you like
yeah,
a
yeah,
hamburger with pickles or don't, or you don't need anybody to tell you whether or not you like Coke or Diet Pepsi, right? And I feel like because of the pretense surrounding in it, people want to give themselves up to it, right? They want to bow down. And
yeah, yeah,
I always preach to people, you're an expert in your own taste. And most people, the salespeople at the store, the clerks, the sommeliers at the restaurant, they are more akin to a sales. I'm sorry, they're more akin to a tour guide, right?
hmm
They put
hmm
together the list, they know the list, they know the nooks and crannies in it, and based on a conversation with you, whether they have the exact same wine that you are looking for, stylistically, they should be able to point you in the right direction to something that you normally drink. And I think more people, guests should be thinking about them more as tour guides and less about arbiters of their own taste.
I'm interested that the tour guide concept. So for listeners wondering what it takes to become a sommelier
Hmm.
beyond the certifications, talk a little bit, Andre, about the mindset and the curiosity, great word, that someone has to cultivate and have within to make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, curiosity, I think, is a big thing, right? Like wanting to know why. Right?
Yeah.
As a sommelier, you know, people bring you, quote unquote, a finished product, right? They put the wine in front of you, they let you taste it. And from that, your mind is constantly circling back around, evaluating the wine and saying, why does this wine taste this way? Is it something that they're doing in the vineyard? Is something they're doing in the winery? And from that, it, you know, it, it's something that, I think it's funny because people talk a lot about passion, and I definitely believe in passion, but I think what leads you and fuels that passion is curiosity. And
Yeah. Yeah.
as a sommelier, you're kind of required to know a whole lot about a whole lot, right? A whole industry in that sense. So you have to be knowledgeable, you have to have this information stored, but you also have to be able to disseminate that information in a way that is not intimidating, and also like I'm not going to say coddle, but also fits into the framework of hospitality within that restaurant.
Oh, well said. Well said.
Did I
You know,
answer the question? I'm
yeah,
like making
yeah.
sure I did. Okay,
No,
all right.
no, 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 100%. I'm gonna keep going down that
Okay.
path. With your story in wine is maybe it's traditional, maybe it's not, right? It's
Right.
your story, right? And 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 you've been able to articulate exactly when that moment happened, right?
Mhm.
Did your background in design and music culture influence what you do, or was it the opposite? Did your love and knowledge of wine influence other things you did in life?
No, I think it's the other way, right? I tell people, I was a kid that grew up on hip hop and punk rock,
Okay.
right? And that era, right? And so that was me. That shaped who I was. And then
Okay.
when I got into wine, I discovered something else that I loved,
Yeah.
right? And so I
Yeah.
think for me in life, I've been constantly trying to put those things that I love and enjoy together,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
that was a way to be able to kind of make it work. And also it influenced the way that I talked about wine, right? Culturally and how I spoke about wine and used references, pop culture references and things was from my upbringing. And like
Yeah.
I felt like
Yeah.
that made wine relatable, using analogies that seemed to fit and explain things in a much simpler way was a way that I tried to look for every day to explain to not only our staff, right, in a way to speak about wine for them to understand it, but I think how I grew up and all of that and culture and the things that I'm in really shaped the way that I talk about wine.
You know what I love about that sort of approach, that those comments, is that it's almost an analogy for any field, right? Everything you've just explained could be applied to
Yeah.
conversations around becoming an HVAC expert or a
Hmm.
carpenter or a chef or an auto
Yeah.
mechanic, right?
Yep.
Or a farmer or a plumber, right? I love that. So now we're gonna embarrass you a little bit, right? So you
Okay.
earned the title of best young sommelier in America, and then you joined Thomas Keller's team at the French Laundry, and then later at Per Se in New York City.
Yep.
Um, Thomas Keller. I mean, wow. He spoke at our graduation virtually during the pandemic, which was so huge of him, right?
I'm sure.
What was that experience like? Uh, and, and I'm talking more from I imagine as a human being, it was a pretty cool experience to get to know Thomas Keller. But as a sommelier, where you brought your knowledge, he brought his knowledge, and together, you paired food with wine, and
Well, I
wow.
mean, I guess what I learned the most there was I think in most restaurants of that caliber, um, they had a set wine pairing that they changed daily.
Yeah.
And what made the French Laundry different and Thomas Keller different was the approach that he wanted to take within his restaurant. He wasn't You couldn't have a set wine pairing that every table got because his ideology and his thought process said, well, not everybody likes the same thing.
Yes, it
And
does.
so
Yeah.
what was really cool about it and what I had to really learn is that uh, when we had a conversation we always wanted to have a conversation with a guest about wine, right? Because we wanted to find out their likes and dislikes. So if someone said I only drink white wine, then now it was my job and mission to figure out all these different white wines to be able to pair with their meal. And and that made the wine pairing unique to each individual, which was fun and interesting and kept it fresh because we always had to be on our toes. Um, and that whole idea of like tasting food and wine back there with Thomas, that didn't really exist when I was there. And I don't think that was wrong, but we really had to double down on our theories. And we at some point we got to taste some of the things, but it was a different beast in that way. And what I would have to say is like what I learned the most was about food and wine pairing is what I wanted to say. And also what I learned a lot about was just food in general. Like that,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
idea of like, oh, okay, so, all right, so on this course, we're talking about foie gras. All right, so which wine do we want to use? And then, it's like, oh, is it Torchon, which is very clean, right? We would use something that's a little bit leaner, not as cloying. It's a cold preparation of foie, and so, maybe a little Gruner, a little Riesling that had some sharp acidity to it, but nothing like Auslese, right?
Yeah.
And then if we thought about a different preparation of foie gras later in the meal, something like, you know, um, uh, I was gonna say, I don't say it's caramelized hot foie gras. What do they call it? Seared foie gras. Like,
Seared,
yeah,
seared.
yeah.
Yeah,
Is that what they
yeah,
call it? Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And you think about something like that, and then you start to talk about, and that's what I learned. Start to talk about the process, right? You're starting to talk about Maillard, right, and like the crust on the
Yeah, yeah,
outside and the
yeah.
caramelization of that. And for something like that, that's a little richer and thicker. So there, you might want to think of something like Sauterne, something that's a little richer in style. And so you really start to think about the preparation of food critically, and that really determined what direction that you could go in with the wine. And so with a set wine pairing, I felt like sometime you had these slots that you just filled. Here
Yeah.
was it's kind of like we were teaching the sommeliers and pre-chef how to fish, right? When you tell them that you're not teaching them how to fish when you just have a set wine pairing. You're talking about, hey, for the lobster course today with the set of this and that, we're thinking of a Rhone white wine, from this side. And we didn't name producers; we named a few producers so that the sommeliers and also the captains had a little wiggle room on the styles of wines that they wanted. We just gave them a style of wine, but they could look at the producers and go that route. And that was amazing. And that's what I took away from there. Outside there was a lots of things that I took away from there, but that was one involving wine and food, and it was a experience and a process which I think a lot of restaurants don't do. It like
Yeah, this is absolutely fascinating to me. I'm sensing this sort of this freedom of cognitive flexibility, if you will, right?
yeah,
Maybe sometimes they get it wrong, sometimes they get it right,
correct.
but this ability to kind of adjust as necessary. I never would have thought. I would have thought a prefix static menu is it's very transactional, right? It's got to
Yeah.
be this way. That's what's the difference? I can remember standing in the French Laundry's kitchen and looking up and seeing per se closing, on the TV,
Oh
right?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
How would you? And again, ladies and gentlemen, not scripted. We're really putting Andre in a
We're
hot
vibing
seat right
here.
here. How would you describe the difference between? I've read a lot of stuff. I have my own thoughts. The difference between French Laundry and per se.
I think how I tried to explain it in a way that it was, you know, country mouse, city mouse.
Oh,
Right. I think,
oh,
I think
yeah.
maybe that, but also I remember it's like
I
French
love
Laundry is
that.
like a Land Rover, you sports utility vehicle in that way. That's meant, you know what I mean? That's
Yeah, yeah.
rugged and that part. And somehow per se was like, maybe a G Wagon, kind of the same thing, but like in that sense, a little bit more polished, but not in that way. I mean, let me articulate that in a way.
No, I'm feeling you.
Yeah,
I think about New York, like, per se is a
energy.
New
Yeah,
York restaurant,
right.
which has to
And it's
be a
like
lot of
this.
stuff, has to be
Yeah,
alive,
and it's
high
like this.
ceilings. Yeah, boom, boom,
Yep,
boom. And the French Laundry, you know what? You might fly in 3 days prior, get to the spa,
yep,
go to
yep,
Bouchon for breakfast, and ease
yep.
into the grand finale. And so is that pretty accurate to you? That's the way
Yeah,
we
yeah.
felt.
No, totally. It feels like when
Yeah,
in Rome, like you're
yeah,
not at work per
yeah,
se, and you're relaxed in a way, and so
yeah,
you're there to take everything in, and the idea of having a very slow dinner,
yeah.
taking it all in, and like
Experience. Yeah, yeah.
you've really taken in, where in New York you can have the same experience and people are there longer, but it's just it's just a snappier feel. It just feels like,
It's
and then the wines were different, right? I felt like in the time that I was there was a lot of um, what do you call it? There's a lot of just people drink a lot of Bordeaux and Burgundy.
yeah,
Bordeaux was
yeah.
huge and Burgundy was huge. Um, and I would, you sold those things at the French Laundry, a lot of them, expensive ones too. But what we found is we sold a lot of California wine, right? You were in California country. That's what I say. When in Rome, right? You're in California wine country, and that's what we championed and that's what we sold. And then the wine selection was different. It was still rooted in California at per se, but it had a lot larger Burgundy and Bordeaux list.
I have to tell you a funny little story. We have a student here, and a couple of weeks ago, I was just talking to him. He's getting close
Uh,
to the end of the program. I said, "Have you been thinking about your externship?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm kind of thinking of going to the French Laundry." And I'm like, "I'm sorry." Oh, and he goes, and I'm like, "Have you talked to anyone? How can I help?" And he says, "Well, my uncle lives out there." And I'm like, "Oh, your uncle lives out there?" And he goes,
mm,
"Yeah, my uncle's Peter Jacobson." And
mm.
I'm like Peter Jacobson that grows vegetables for the French Laundry. This kid
Oh
was
yeah, yeah,
so
totally.
unassuming. He was so as unassuming. Yeah, my uncle's Peter Jacobson. It was
And you're
absolutely
like,
hilarious.
what?
Yeah. Hey, we have to talk about the Bon Appetit series, World of Wine.
I'd love
What
to.
what was that like stepping into that role, right? You're a host, did you always want to do something on camera? I mean, you're really, really good on camera.
I guess yes and no, but this is where the pre-shift kicks back in, right? When I
Okay.
told you that I was afraid of speaking and all those things, it it became a life skill. I use this kind of analogy when I talk. A lot of our children. I have four boys, and a lot of them, the time when everybody else, their peers, were taking soccer. We were kind of less of soccer. We were like, hey, why don't you learn how to swim? Like
What's the
swimming.
age group? What's the age
Yeah,
group?
so 16, 14, 9, and 6. And
Wow.
so we
Wow.
have the
You're
varsity and the
busy.
JV. And so what was interesting to me in a lot of ways was swimming is a life skill. Not only can you save your own, you can save somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And soccer is, there's lots of great things from that as well. But what I figured was even like I'm in a restaurant and I'm working, but if I focused on speaking at this pre-shift, which could be considered public speaking, that would be a life skill that I could take with me anywhere and be
Yeah.
applied
Yeah.
anywhere. And then you couple that with, 10 years on the road, almost every single week, doing wine dinners, talking, storytelling and those things, it felt pretty good. And then it just kind of all evolved. So like before, and I think a lot of people approached me about wine, but it was in that era where wine, they didn't think it would work on television. And so that was always a weird thing. And but also, big brands just approach me out of the
Yeah.
blue.
Yeah.
So I have a
Yeah.
Microsoft commercial, I had a Cadillac commercial, I had a Johnny Walker commercial. And so those all kind of lead it up to being on camera. And, I had shot sizzle reels with different production companies. But, when I thought about Hollywood, it really feels like hurry up and wait.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
during COVID, Bon Appetit reached out, and I was a little apprehensive. I don't know why, but I was. And they asked me and they had different ideas. And then at the moment, I just said, if I approach this in the way that I approach a lot of other things in my life, then, I could probably be good at this. And that was it. I think the key moment was I said something like, will you let me use emojis to rate the wines? And they said, sure. And that was it. And I decided, it's like, hey, I like, this is cool. Let's do it. And I wasn't real sure of if I was good or not. I wasn't real sure that it would resonate with the audience, which I don't know who the audience, because it was the Bon Appetit people. At best, I thought novice would kind of like maybe latch onto it. And to my surprise, there's a lot of industry people who look at it and have learned from it. There's a lot of people who are novice that don't drink that have watched it. And I think that has made it a lot more meaningful to me moving forward. Like, at the beginning, I was kind of like, I'm not sure what happens. I'm in a dark room and, there's three people on the other side and nobody laughs at my jokes kind of thing. Right. And, and then as the videos started to come out and as the world started to interact with them, and as people started to approach me on the street and on the plane or wherever I might be, and having conversations with them, I realized that it wasn't just novice. There were industry people who wanted to do well in this industry that were watching very closely. And um, I don't know, that felt good. And I think it gave it more meaning. And it's funny because in my mind, I approach those videos as like I'm doing the pre-shift meeting for the staff at the
I
restaurant.
love that analogy. But you
Yeah.
know what? The videos feel good too. I mean, honestly, you should be incredibly proud. They're humble, they're genuine. So the word approachable just comes to mind. Wine
Hmm.
is not often approachable. People are,
Absolutely.
they're a little awkward about it, right? And you're much more earnest about your journey to the camera. Whereas, when we decided we were going to do a podcast, I drew the shortest straw. And here we are, face for radio. That's me. Hey, we have to talk about Trader Joe
Yes.
episodes, right? The Trader Joe's episodes. Do you know? Do bargain bottles of wine get a bad rap?
Well, yeah. I mean, and rightfully so. Like I think people make good wine, people make bad wine. You can find it on all levels. Overall, I think a lot of people do think that they get bad raps. Uh, but also, I like to tell people in wine, generally, what you really hope for or wish for is that you get what you pay for. Right, right, like in that sense, right? You don't want to feel like that you overpaid for something, and I think generally bargain wines kind of fall into that category. But what made these places different is because of their buying power and the fact that they have the power to access great wine and offer it at a lower
At a
cost.
better,
Yeah,
that's
a
a
better cost,
difference.
right? Yeah,
Big
no,
difference.
absolutely.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
and that for me was like exciting because as a sommelier, every day I think you get up and you're energetic because it's your job. What you want to seek out are wines that drink above their pay grade, right? That's what you want to do, right? Like, yeah, you want to find wines that like, okay, this price point ratio seems right, or this is overpriced. But what you really want to find and be excited about are those wines that feel like a value to you. And I felt like shooting the Costco and the Trader Joe's videos felt to answer uh, uh, set out to answer questions by a larger population that wasn't really into wine but went there for value.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's
yeah.
what made those videos fun, and also in a way where I could approach it and just show up on set. Like the idea of like I didn't want to know too much about it. I just wanted to go in honestly and say, "Oh, okay, what is this? How does this taste? This is great." And yeah, I hope people really got some value out of it.
Yeah, clearly, I mean, to be really, really, honest, as a sommelier or a winemaker or an educator, not everyone can do this. I mean, a palate is a very
Yeah.
unique thing, right? So when you're Andre tasting wines or spirits, um, what do you look for? Again, no right or wrong answer. Do you specifically have a favorite varietal or something, or do you go with the seasons? Do you go with the food, the event?
Well, I think it's all of the above, right? That's what makes it special when you're into wine, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
you have your new favorites, the new thing that you're into and that you're diving deeper in. You have the old classics that are great. You have, oh, I'm going to a oyster riot or a beach party and I want to bring those wines. And so it's funny because it's kind of where it says, oh, hey, do you have a favorite kid? And the right answer is no, but a lot of parents say in the moment, yeah, right? Like in the moment, you kind of, like, oh, hey, or not that, or that you're connecting with one a little bit more, or you're working on something together, and like you're excited to see that happen. And, to me, Pinot Noir was always great. All the great wine lists that I had a hand in contributing to at working through restaurants, they bookend on red and white Burgundy. And so I think that was definitely a love for me. And then, I think most sommeliers, the gateway is what Riesling. So Riesling always has felt great to me. But, I've been on a kick for quite a few years of drinking old American wine. I feel like it represents a lot of the great value that exists in wine.
Oh, wow. Wow. I was just going to ask favorite region, but
Yeah.
I like that. But
No,
that'll,
absolutely.
you know, um, I almost forgot about this. So we have a lot of thought leaders on the show that tend to be in our industry, right?
Okay.
Oftentimes they're behind the stove, but there's this common thread: music, oftentimes motorcycles. Um, how about you? Music, motorcycles, both?
Music, cycling, riding.
Oh, cycling now. Yeah,
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 yeah. I
yeah.
think
I
yeah,
love that.
those are a lot of those things.
Top three bands of all time. Go.
You can't spring it on me like that.
Oh, I
Oh my
love
God. Now
it.
now it's not the right answer.
I got him.
Genesis up there for me.
Okay.
Uh,
Really? Okay.
yeah. I'm a big Genesis fan. Um,
You probably can't see behind me. I've got these tiny little albums. I got U2, I got Dave Matthews, Fleetwood Mac, Bob Seger. I'm a Detroit rocker fan.
I see you.
I got the Eagles and I got Springsteen up there.
Yeah,
But
Springsteen is probably one of them when he was with 8th Street.
yeah, yeah,
It's just
yeah.
like it's so funny because it's really hard for me to put a finger on something like that because that was a really big part of my life growing up. My
Yeah.
father
Yeah.
bought music every Tuesday, and it was something that we listened to, and like maybe kind of really like focused on R&B per se, but like the other 20% was kind of all across the board. And I have to say, if I was really saying it, Hall and Oates,
Oh, I
that
got to
that
chill. I got to chill, right?
yeah, that I think my kids have Pavlovian, right? Because every time we would eat dinner together, I would always play, some Hall and Oates. But
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
so it stretches across quite a few genres, and that quest for new music and new sound still continues to this day. It's just something
I
that
love that.
that I like, and the idea of wine and music together, right? And how do you do that? It's interesting, not like pairing food, but it's more like pairing a vibe and what you feel and what those wines could make you feel like. And so I've kind of stepped back and looked outside of the box to talk about wine as an experience, right? And I think that's how younger generations talk about music these days, right? They don't talk about melodic sounds or lyrically, right? Especially
Yeah.
when we're talking about like hip hop, they talk a lot about vibe. Like this is what it
Yeah.
makes me feel like, which is great, right? I don't think that it takes anything away from the artist, but in a way of like how we judged music and how it was good or what it meant to our generation is different than what it means now. And for me, that I try to embrace that and meet people where they're at and talk about wine in the way that it's a vibe and how it can make you feel. And that was the part of using emojis, which is sounds a lot complicated than it is, but
That's the right answer. That's the right answer. If you do make it out to Colorado
Mhm.
anytime soon, we'll stop in Denver and right next to Bobby's Tavernetta, and you probably know about it, Sunday Vinyl. And
Yeah, I did a
he's
dinner there last night. I mean last year. Yeah.
yeah, and he's spinning music with the food and wine, and I absolutely love it.
Yeah, and you're
Wh-
starting to see that too. It's pretty remarkable, right? Like in that way of, you use music in a restaurant to set the atmosphere and the vibe, right? So to speak. And you're starting to see a lot of these listening bars, but then wine bars that really focus on vinyl, which is cool.
I love it. I love it. I have a 14-year-old old at home, and I wrote
Uh,
down a bunch of these. I need to be able to communicate with him, right? Especially when it comes to music. Your
mhm.
label, Maison Noir Wines, and I love this section of the show
Okay.
because I'm a University of Oregon grad. So,
All right.
um, unique, distinctive grapes. I think initially created for some of New York's restaurants, right? I'd love to know where the name came from, and I'd love to know what the relationships with winemakers in Oregon are, and
And how it
why
started. Yeah, totally.
why is that special to you? I just love
Well,
this.
yeah. The name. So originally the name was called Mouton Noir Wines. Uh, we changed the name after maybe a 6 or 7 legal battle with Mouton Rothschild.
Okay, okay,
Right. So Mouton Noir is interesting because the name was given to me. It was a nickname that was given to me when I moved to New York, or maybe was given to me and I accepted in a way. And it's interesting because I guess the story goes I was doing the pre-shift meeting, and we were talking. I was talking about highlighting that Zinfandel was Bialy, and it was called Black Chicken, and the whole concept was is during Prohibition, people would come out to the winery and they'd say, "Hey, I'll take some eggs, I'll take this, and do you have? I'll take a couple of those black chickens," which was like illegal wine or whatever.
oh,
And
okay.
so I'm telling the story, and we're having a laugh, and then after the pre-shift meeting, before the guests come in, the staff is kind of gathered around and they were talking, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we should call you Black Chicken," or like trying to give me a nickname. I was like, "You absolutely will not call me Black Chicken." And then we started talking, and then somebody said, "Well, what about Black Sheep?" And then I think I said, "Well, if we say it in French, so Mouton Noir. And it's twofold in a way where, for me, I realized that I didn't do things the way that everybody else did them within the four walls of the restaurant. Think about how I described wine. It was banging. Like the terms that I use, how I talked about wine was different. And, you know, made me a black sheep in that regard. Uh, and also what I have to say is that I literally was the black sheep, right? Because there's not a lot of people that look like me that do what I do in this industry. And and for me, I feel like, well, I can't hide that, right? You know what I mean? Like if you see me, you just see me. And I don't know, it was just something that I decided that I would embrace, right? Because the whole idea of being a black sheep, being an outcast, being a misfit is, I don't know, to me, it was something about if you can embrace what makes you different, ultimately that will set you apart from everybody else and help you propel you to success if you could harness that. And like
Yeah.
that's really kind of the thing. It was like a calling card for everybody who felt like they didn't fit in. That meant that like, no, that was your superpower. And I think there's like a quote that says something like, they all laugh at me because I'm different, and I laugh at them because they're all the same. And I think when you embrace being a misfit or a black sheep, it's empowering in a way because it gives you creative license to do things differently. Like
Yeah.
it fit,
Yeah.
like I think now the kids say on brand, but it fits into that thing. And I encourage people to be different and to do things differently. Um, and that was kind of it. And so when I got the nickname, I thought it was funny and we laughed and I said, I'm going to name my company that. And then I created the logo and it was my screensaver at work. And while, decanting ungodly priceless bottles of wine, I would joke and talk about things I wanted to make and different names. And it was kind of like a running joke. And then when it
Yeah.
came time to leave, it became a real thing. And that, I don't know, that was just something really fun for me. And also, it was very simple, right? So all the labels are black and white, right? It just, it was very stark in that sense where labels are very colorful and those things. And I remember as a kid, I'm part of a military family, and we would shop once a month at the commissary, and so it was a huge shop. And so you would go with your mom, and you go down every single aisle. You might even have two carts. And I remember going down each aisle, and every aisle you turned on was like this mosaic of colors. And so you go down, and then you would go to this one aisle and turn, and you would stop in your tracks because everything was all white, and it was called the generic aisle. I don't know if you've experienced this. And so it was a
No.
generic aisle, and everything was packaged in white, and it had like black Helvetica font on it, right? So it's to say a bag of chips, a white bag of chips, and to say potato chips on it. So it was before grocery stores got smart and had their own brands that they marketed. They
Yeah.
would have these
Yeah.
things. So like this would just say be all white and just say soda on it, or it would
Yeah.
say all white and say beer on it. And it was something about the starkness of that and how it fit in, like it stood out. So like behind the back bar, it would stand out. It looks generic in a way, but that's by default, right? That, and it also fits into that thing of being plain Jane that you can't judge a cover by its book.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you can't drive. Yeah, you can't drive a cover. What am I talking
A
about here?
book by its
A
cover.
book cover.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, what? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
No.
totally, and
No.
like in that aspect, like that was fun for me. I
Yeah.
didn't have a graphic design background. I couldn't afford a designer, and I designed them, and that was a creative release for me. Uh, but I learned so much, and like I don't know. It's like everybody's like, your branding is great and all that, and I was like, I don't know. I just did what felt right. There was no book that I went by. I just had these ideas and put them out there and had the names and like to put my name on it and say Andre Mack Chateau or Chateau Andre Mack or Andre Mack Estates. Like to me, that felt pompous in a way,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
especially if I was starting from scratch, like it'd be different if I had a family legacy that I came from that did this.
Sure.
Um,
Sure. Yeah.
and I always felt like by naming the wines something that resonated with other people that made them interested. By calling a wine Love Drunk, that felt great to me. Right? You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
people were curious. They were more curious by a wine called Love Drink than they ever would have been by Chateau Mac, is kind of how I felt.
I love this conversation around superpowers and being on brand and somewhat related. You've hosted seminars in Aspen at Newport Mansions,
Yeah, yeah.
wine and food festivals. For students that listen and get inspired by you and what you've done, I'm curious how important these sort of events are for someone's inspiration and to be able to network. Do you have to be at these events?
Well, no, I don't think you have to be at those events, but I felt like for me that I don't know, sometimes I felt like they were tests. You were testing your skills, right? In a way,
Oh,
like
yeah,
how do
yeah,
you know what you know? And also
yeah.
like how do you know that like you're good at it?
And how do
Like I've
people
done,
react? Yeah,
yeah, I've
yeah,
done
yeah.
you've done millions of wine dinners and those kind of things, but and I think some of them for some people they can be validating in a way. I'd have to say like at the beginning I was gung ho and I did a lot of them, but also what I realized as I furthered in my career that like they generally happened on the weekend and I just felt like I'd much rather be home with my family than doing them, right? Because
Sure.
it just
Yeah.
becomes a party, like you're not really selling wine, like you are building a brand and opportunities can come from that the visibility. Um, but yeah, I think we should all do them, and I think for a lot of young, inspiring people, these are some of the goals that they have to be a part of those events. And I think if that is a goal for you, then you should uh, actively participate or pursue.
That's good
Um,
advice. That's
right?
good
Because
advice.
because because accomplishing a goal is accomplishing a goal. It's not maybe the outcome of that goal, but it's the feeling that you get from accomplishing that goal that helps you go out there and get up and go back out there again and do it again.
Part of the journey. Yeah.
Yep.
What's something, Andre, that you're dreaming about right now that's outside of the wine glass?
The wine glass. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I think for me, like, maybe photography, it's kind of some of the ancillary things around running a company. Like you have to take pictures of bottles and these things in the world that we live in. But I don't know, photography seems good. I have lots of different interests. Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
photography school. I thought you were going to say being on the ultimate dish, but
Well, that too.
that
That's a
too.
given. I'm already here, right?
Yeah.
Like that went away once the day you asked me to
Yeah.
participate. That's
No,
kind of how I operate. Yeah.
students that are listening and stuff, though, I love that you throw out so many different things, right? Nothing's unapproachable, right? Photography sort of makes sense, right?
Correct.
It's in the bucket, right? Why
Mhm.
not, right?
Yeah, no. And I have lots of different interior design, like all those different types of things. And, sometimes I feel like, I actively went outside of the wine industry to look for inspiration because I wanted to do something different, right? When I
Yeah,
looked at like some people to work with, I wanted to work with people who had never worked in the wine industry to get a fresh perspective in that way. And
yeah,
I don't know. I think, just working with different people is fun. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm excited and interesting about where wine goes and also where my own personal journey takes me.
yeah, yeah. And you've got four kids that,
I do. Get
yeah,
ready to go,
that you
one's
got to
getting ready
keep
to go
an
to
eye on.
college. Yeah, it's great.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Amazing. I love it. I don't know where Noel's pinging me. I had no idea that we've gone way over our time. This has been so unbelievably fun and captivating and riveting. And I
Thank
can't
you.
let you go though, Andre, until I ask. The
All
name
right.
of the show is The Ultimate Dish. And I gotta ask you, what is the ultimate dish? It could be wine, it could be a dream, it could be a memory, or it could be a dish.
Yeah, the dish. The ultimate dish for me is sweetbreads over soft scrambled eggs with black truffles.
Oh my goodness.
We call
Did this
that the
guy
Mac
work at the
Daddy.
French Laundry or
Yeah, we call it the Mac Daddy. There we go.
oh my gosh. We've never had that one, but I can feel it. It Ratatouille. I'm
There
going
you go.
back. Yeah. Beautiful. Hey, this has been so much fun.
Thank
You're
you. It has.
welcome. Welcome anytime. Hey, we have a studio in downtown Chicago where we film all of our content. If we're ever in Chicago together, I'd love to I'd love to do something cool live with
Well,
you. And
let's make it meaningful. Let's not say if we're ever there together. Let's plan that. Let's
let's
do that.
just do it.
I'm in
Let's
that.
just
I'm
do
into
it.
that. Yeah, that would be great.
Well
Let me
said.
know.
Well
Yeah.
said. Hey, thanks for being with us, and best of luck always.
All right. Thank you so much. I had a really
All right.
great time. Really cool. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Ultimate Dish Podcast, brought to you by Auguste Escoffier School of Culinary Arts. Visit escoffier.edu/podcast to find any materials mentioned during the podcast, including notes, links, and other resources. And if you can, please leave us a rating on Apple or Spotify and subscribe to support our show. This helps us reach more aspiring individuals ready to take the next step toward their dream careers. Thanks for listening.